This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Hayden Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Hayden's iPhone, Seth Hurd.
It's the consultant and the millennial. We are back. It's totally my fault. We missed a couple weeks here. Hayden is quite popular and has been on the road a lot, so we recorded some episodes ahead, and then I knocked a hard drive off my desk, and those episodes died unless I want to pay like $3,000 to recover them. And so far, I don't want to do that bad yet.
Makes complete sense, and it's great that you are willing to shield your wife by taking the blame for knocking the hard drive off the desk when it was Amanda. And so I just think that's an admirable thing to do is to publicly say you did it when you've done enough things that were your fault. So I'm sure you could take one for the team. And
no
it
comment.
would be fair in the great cosmic justice.
No comment. Two other notes before we get started. The first one is that I'm only wearing a Yankees hat because it's Amanda. She lived in New York as a kid, and sorry, Mom, don't disown me. And then the second thing is, if you're wondering,
I wasn't going to say anything, but you do suck.
I just haven't shaved my head in a couple days, and so this was a solution for the Facebook video YouTube part of it. The third thing is, if you're wondering, what happens off mic, Hayden played a very crucial role in my life in the last couple weeks. I was going to call someone and just yell at them, and I didn't because Hayden told me not to, and that was probably a good idea. Did you have any comment about not telling me or telling me not to yell at people?
Oh, it's usually not that great of an idea. But it does make you feel good for a number of seconds. Okay,
so
then HR. Then you have these meetings with HR, and it takes forever. You get behind on all your other stuff, and there's a number of ways that yelling starts to suck after just a couple of wonderful moments of pure exhilaration when it leaves your mouth.
Okay, so we're talking leadership versus management on this episode, but I do have to tell one story before we get going. I was teaching a for-profit college, and I was a pretty tough person to replace because I was teaching website coding, and that's a pretty tough thing to find somebody to teach in the college sphere because there's just not that many of us out there, right? And I had a student who complained because I told her to redo a fellow millennial student. I told her to redo a project, and she said, "Aren't you going to say anything nice about the project?" And I just said, "No." And so she went and complained to the administration that I was a mean, cruel, nasty, son of a gun. And so I got called in and questioned about it, and I just said, "I did say that." And then I just sat there. And my boss was like, "Well, try to handle it differently next time." So I wasn't yelling at someone, but the point is, if you are invaluable enough, maybe you can get away with a little bit more.
You know what? And that is exactly right. And, you can have whatever style works as long as, you're Bill Belichick and the Patriots win almost every year. It's when you quit winning that suddenly your style gets to be a conversation with everybody. And so that's right. Invaluable people are given more permission to have whatever style they want to have. And that ties into something I think that's worth talking about, which is the difference between management and leadership. How does a person grow as a leader? How does a person move from managing to leading? Because I know a lot of people are watching that in their own companies. They're watching people make or not make that transition. It's the hardest transition there is in organizations. And then a lot of people want to make that transition from manager to leader. And, after having worked with leadership development and worked with leaders for 25 years, I've been able to see a number of people make it well and a number of people not make it well. And we've got some ideas of some resources for people who are right on that hunt. And the style you use and the personality you have and how do you blend your style and personality, I think are key things in making you invaluable in that transition.
I just wanted to tell a story to be an idiot. And look at that. I set us up perfectly to learn.
You are not an idiot. You are not an idiot. You're just blunt. And people who are blunt can be great. People who are blunt can be great leaders as long as they've got some other things that allow them to balance that out. Because really the two key things, regardless of generation, Ronstadt discovered this in their Worldwide Work Survey, two key things, regardless of the generations, are every generation wants approachability and respect. So managers, leaders who are respectful and who are approachable, every generation, we're in the 90s on that. Now, they may differ on how authoritarian they are. They may differ on a number of other things, but approachability and respect are the two key things. And so that and they don't wear Yankees hats in Chicagoland. They just don't. Love for their wife or their hard drive knocking off the table, wife or not.
Yeah. Well, the thing is if after I haven't shaved my head for a few days and I have some hair growth, I just look like a janitor who deals meth on the side. And so know what? That is really not the kind of look that we're going for on this podcast. Okay, so let's start digging into this thing. Making the transition from management to leadership. By the way, this is going to be super practical, as all things Hayden does, because if you haven't joined us yet, this could turn into one of those really bad conference talks that everybody hates, and that's not the kind of thing you're going to get here. So let's.
You're right. That's right. Because this is a classic conference talk. What's the difference between management and leadership?
Yeah.
The difference between management and leadership is very practically speaking, it is the hardest transition you're going to make, and there are very few resources to help you do it. And it is about translating your personality effectively into something that other people can follow. And a lot of folks are in coaching for leadership development, and really what that coaching is doing is trying to get them into a Procrustean bed. You remember that old story of in Greek mythology of the really wacky guy who would take all the travelers, invite them in, put them in a bed, and if they were too short, he would stretch them out, and if they were too tall, he would kind of lop them off. And so that's kind of the classic Procrustean bed. There's a one-size-fits-all model for leaders, and they spend a lot of time trying to get people to fit into that. Whereas the transition is a tough transition. There's not a lot of resources for it. There's not a lot of training for it. And if you don't translate your own personality so that you can lead other people through who you are, you're going to spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy trying to be somebody that's this ideal leadership myth. And I think we've seen that myth in organizational designs, and I think we're seeing it in the leadership space as well.
Okay. So let's case study me real quick then to get going on this, right? Because I started a company this year. I have a team of freelancers, nobody full-time yet. Am I a manager or a leader at this point?
Both. Now, when you're talking about people who are working in corporations, leadership is typically what happens when you have managers reporting to you.
Okay.
But whenever you're starting an organization, you've got to have a combination of management and leadership. And so, take the classic definition of the two. Leaders work on the airplane, managers optimize the airplane. They manage the airplane. So leaders actually rewire the airplane while it's flying. They work on the systems. Leaders work in the systems is one of the classic differences. Now, of course, there's a lot of overlap between good managers and good leaders. Both of them listen well. Both of them can channel people's personal sense of mission and purpose and connect it into a higher sense of vision and purpose. Both do that. But kind of the classic distinctions between leaders work on vision, managers work on people, leaders work on, I like to say it this way, leaders have a to-do list they can't knock out in a week. Managers have a to-do list of things that need to be installed or implemented or tweaked, whereas leaders have to think in terms of 3 months or 6 months or 2 years, because there's some things you just can't manage your way out of, and what you're left with is leadership. When you can't put together a good enough to-do list, a good enough process, a good enough checklist, then suddenly you're dealing with leadership things where you have to be able to motivate people, connect people, and get people to move forward. And so your day in and day out work is either really good management meaning you're managing with a leadership hat on. You're talking about what the vision of Digital Private Farm is. You're keeping very capable people who, are working, are freelancing with you or working part-time with you. You're keeping people who, are killing it. You're keeping that kind of talent interested and moving forward. That kind of high talent management is really a combination of the two.
I don't think I could have started a company earlier than I did in some ways. Well, I did in 2012, and it tanked because, quite frankly, I was really depressed and hated my life. And it's really hard to, birth something creatively when you're freaking miserable. And, for those of you who have entrepreneurial ambitions and you're still single, try not to marry and or date a psycho, because it'll just suck all the air out of the room. And that's the other thing that happened to me in 2012, 2013 is I was dating.
That's a whole nother episode. How to tell if they're a psycho, and don't date or marry a psycho. I think that's a whole nother episode. Don't hurting your business by dating or marrying a psycho.
So, in some ways I couldn't have done it until 2017, because I really had to kind of finish becoming the right kind of person to do this. Right. But now that I'm out of corporate America, I also see, when you talk about the difference between management and leadership, I'm much more a leader than a manager. And I never got to leadership because I'm just not enough of a suck up. I was too blunt, and I ran my head into too many things because I was right. I knew I was right, and I didn't care who else didn't think I was right. I was going to push things through.
All right. Well, you got to translate that into something that can get that people will willingly follow. And because there is a whole portion of the population that needs structure and needs delicacy, then you got to be able to translate that intensity and bluntness into something that in a large organization would allow you to navigate through some of those bits of politics. And so I think it's a good rule of thumb. Often people say that, make it sound like leadership is the varsity team and management is the junior varsity. And I think the fine folks at Gallup came along with First Break All the Rules and blew that up and basically discovered that management is really essential. And a lot of organizations are actually overled and undermanaged. For example, I do some work with religious organizations, and they are almost to an organization over-led and undermanaged. They got great visions. They just can't get a project plan put together. They can't have the difficult conversations. They can't get on with things from a good management standpoint. Their meetings ramble, and they're too patient with people who want to grandstand or who want to be passive aggressive. And they need to look at them and go, yeah, that meeting sucks because you have no good agenda, and so we're all leaving until you can run a good meeting. In a religious organization, that wouldn't be nice. And so let's say that you had worked in a religious organization, Seth, then your level of bluntness would probably come across as somewhere close to mean, as opposed to just not suffering foolishness easily or lightly. And so I'm not sure religious organizations are the right setting for you, because you'll probably always be seen as somebody who throws too many elbows under the basket.
Can we talk a little bit about leadership and self-deception real quick? Because, man, I struggle with this every single week. And I think that, people in small, medium, and very large companies are probably going through the same thing. I tend to fall back on, I can do this, I can get it done, when it's way outside my wheelhouse. For example, I am really good at learning and innovation, and I can sit down and make myself a pretty dang good video editor over the span of a month, right? And I can conceptualize a brilliant product, right? Like if I'm doing something for a client, I can conceptualize just a stunningly good Facebook campaign, like ads into email drip campaign into sale, right? The problem is, once I've done it a couple times, I can't do it anymore because I'm too bored and frustrated and just want to go make more money. And I am continually having to gut check myself, have other people talk to me about the fact that I just can't sit down and with a great deal of efficiency knock out something that's highly detailed that I've already learned.
Yes, there are people who have a high need for stimulation and bore easily. Yeah, there's an interesting personality survey, and I know there are folks out there who are haters of all personality surveys, but there's one called the Colby that's interesting, and they call people quick start, who need a lot of stimulation and need a lot of variety. They just get bored once they've mastered something. So the idea of doing the same thing again and again, whereas for some people, that for them is absolutely a thrill, because once they've mastered it, they love the precision of it. They love the success of it. Whereas other people don't feel successful when they do the same thing over and over again. They feel bored because there are no new mountains to conquer. And so understanding that and determining if, now I'm talking about this theoretically and not just about you. So don't go see your doctor.
Okay.
But most people have to decide, am I within the bounds of health? And, some people who just can't sit still, part of it's the way the front of their brain's formed. And, part of it is I'm just not going to fit in any organization. I'm not going to make that happen. And I've actually told clients before, yeah, you're just wired you get bored way too fast. You're not going to be able to do repetitive things. But some people just need medication. Yeah. And they can't sit still long enough because they've got, whatever you want to call it. And adult ADHD or whatever it is, their brains not grown together in the same way, and they can be wonderfully creative, but also make themselves crazy. Now, if you're a leader that's to use Colby terms, a quick start, then you have to find people around you who get great joy out of making sure the details are cleaned up.
And I will say that where I think I am stronger there is I really do empower the people around me to basically be my boss. So, we share a virtual admin company, and I just tell Hoka, I'm bad at this. Tell me not to do these things. Tell me what to do. Order me around because I need it. And that's what I'm paying you to do. I'm paying you to be super blunt and push me around. And when I do that, it works. And when I think I will just sit down and knock this out, as opposed to I will train somebody else, I'll delegate. Because when you're growing, it's like, oh my gosh, well, I'm just going to do this myself because there's just not any time to train anybody else. And the thing is like I get worse every round of me doing it myself.
That makes sense. And so, what you're really good at is designing projects. You're really good at setting up projects. You're really good at selling. You're really good at meeting people and networking. You're really good at writing. You're really good at at interviewing and the kind of things you did when you're a DJ. So the kind of human interaction, creativity, getting things initiated and going are all the things you do best. And frankly, those are things that are really hard to outsource or find replacements for. So the good news is you're really good at things that are difficult for finding other people to do. And those are the things where we got to let go. Now, this applies to everybody because one of the things, even in large corporations, that people struggle with is letting go. And you can see it most in people who are detail-oriented. One of the advantages you have, Seth, is that you don't like doing those things and you get worse at it. So there's no reinforcement that comes by going, oh, I am the master of details. But there are a whole lot of people, and I was working with a company recently, they said there's a significant difference in the growth of these are franchisees, the people who are detail-oriented and need to make it all work, who love the processes, who love the details, and the people who are able to say, let's grow at 30% a year and we'll figure it out as we go. There's a big difference between those folks because the folks that are detailed have actually had a lot of reinforcement that says, nobody really can do it as well as I can. And you know what? There are some people who, that's a classic delegation thing is, you think you can, you do it better than anybody else. I've met some people who really do it better than anyone else. And because of that, they don't let it go because they can do it twice as fast. They can do it better. And it clogs up their entire ability to lead, their entire ability to grow. So good managers delegate. Good leaders let good managers delegate. Good leaders actually let go. Good managers delegate. Good leaders just let go and let managers do their thing. And so while you got to do both right now, while you're a hybrid, a lot of people are in situations where they're trying to become leaders and they're still getting their kicks on the processes and on the details and on actually executing or being able to deliver better than everybody else. And you've got to watch other people be not be as good as you That's where the vast majority of people are at, as opposed to your situation, which is I'm now bored doing this interview with Hayden because we've already done like 8 of these. Okay, and so
yeah. That's not true. A case study on that. I was with a company once where there was a guy that had rocketed through the ranks, kind of rock star within this corporation, right? Within this company. And then my team, the little team I was managing, was partially tasked with planning the Christmas party. And my first instinct was, oh, good, I get to take over the Christmas party. It's canceled. Everybody go take your department to lunch. The end. Like, I don't really get
there are reasons why, one, you should not work in religious organizations again. First of all, nobody calls them Christmas parties except in religious organizations.
That's how you do.
Yeah, and secondly, the fact that you wanted to cancel it around the most important holiday in the Christian calendar, and both of those are really good reasons why you should probably not work in religious organizations again.
For the record, I wasn't trying to cancel Christmas. I'm not the Grinch. I just thought it would be more efficient to give all the departments money and tell them to go take their teams out and be happy in life. And so this leader just, who had a ton of responsibilities, had to step back down on the details of the Christmas party. And I was like, cool, I never wanted the stupid Christmas party. You detail yourself to death on the Christmas party. But that would probably be a pretty good example of not being able to let go. You're in charge of something that, could generate millions of dollars.
If your team is mutinying, if you've got somebody on your team that's like, no, I'm just not going to do it, then somebody's got to roll over to the weak side and handle that project. And so that leader had to decide. It may have been a great decision on his part. He may have said, you know what? Seth good enough at what he does that I'd rather handle this Christmas party than sidetrack him. On the other hand, it probably would have been a better conversation for him to say, Hurd, we're in charge of the Christmas party. You're on my team. Crap rolls down the hill. You are not pushing crap back up to me. Do a Christmas party. Do a good Christmas party, or I'll string you up. That would have been a very fine, blunt conversation where he would have said to his manager, not my monkey, not my thing. Your job, your stuff, you're the manager, delegate it out. Go find some other people in other departments that love throwing this. Go find the people who did it last year. Go find the people who would love to be involved in it, and run the thing. That's probably what he should have done rather than get back involved in it, because he was actually reverse managing rather than leading.
For the record, actually, I wasn't sabotaging the Christmas party. It was my department. Another department got into a fight about what the Christmas party was going to be. And I probably didn't do a good job at playing referee because, again, I don't care. It's sort of like if you're like forced to go to a kid's birthday party that you don't actually like, and that kid and another kid you don't like start punching each other in the face, and you're like, hey, I won. That's a bad analogy.
No, it really isn't a bad analogy. It's just it's fun to watch. Wow, this is a better party than I was expecting. Look at this. People are punching. And because I don't really like either one of you, my mom made me go. And those are the ones that sidetrack managers. When I don't have patience for it. I'm not wired for it. And then there's a bunch of conflict around what the vision is for it. It's like, all right, I'm going to check out. I think a lot of managers would say, I'm going to check out to that. Now, that's where a leader probably needs to do one of two things. Either say, Seth, you need to manage that. But if he had any sense, he would know, Seth is not the best at spin moves through political landmines. I'm going to have to run interference for him on this. He's not going to be successful at this. This is not going to be successful. We're a small team. I'm going to have to run on this. I'm going to have to run the ball on that. That's probably a good call on his part. That would have been setting you up in the thing that you are the least willing to do, and maybe even the least skilled at, which is delicately navigating through people's feelings about silly things.
That's probably the thing I'm least skilled at. Without making myself out to be a big, huge jerk, which we're doing a good job of in this episode. What else do managers?
No, you are just on the far side of no patience, and you're just on the far side of no patience. I think a lot of people can relate. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And then there's a whole other group of people who are like, Seth, it's just like my boss or this member of my team that gives me homicidal fantasies. I don't know why they have to be like that. I don't know why we can't have an hour discussion on what kind of potato salad we have at the party, because it really matters. And I have a real strong preferences for the ones at Sam's Club. This is exactly a conversation I set in on as a consultant. I'm like, how much are you paying me to listen to these people argue over potato salad varieties? It was beyond crazy.
Oh my.
But there are people who are like, it really, really, really matters. And we need those people. I really would like those people to sterilize the equipment before my surgery, for example. Mm-hmm. I don't want the people that round up to the nearest clean enough. I like people who make sure that all the little probes are absolutely perfect before the doctor inserts them, if you're with me on that. So I love those detail people.
And obviously I need those detailed people to survive.
It's true. They can do. We just get under each other's skin, and that's really one of the big reasons why leaders struggle. Now, there's a lot of other things that go into moving from management to leadership, but one of the reasons leaders struggle is being able to work with the people and motivate and lead people who have a different personality than yours. That's where it pulls off of the hard to learn into the skills. Well, great topic, great stuff, and tried to be really practical with what's it take to move from management to leadership. And great having you on the couch, Seth Hurd.
Hey, I do want to give a quick shout out to Hayden. You'll notice he's really busy and he could help you as well. You can check out peopledrivenresults.com. And if you're a manager or a manager trying to transition to leadership, you need to check out Hayden's guide to cutting your generational turnover in half. The economy is great right now. Some people are just going to move around no matter what, but you need to hang on to the talent you can hang on to, because it's probably the number one pain point in business right now. You can cut your generational turnover in half. Get the free guide at peopledrivenresults.com. Okay, so we talked about this being super practical, right? Can you bullet point the rest of the things that you need to do? Because you said there's not a lot of resources in this space. So you need to not micromanage. You need to let other. Well,
there's not a lot of training. There are some books about making the transition. There's the first 100 days when you're a new manager. There's just there's not nearly as many people go through it. There's a lot of training from people who were contributors and are now supervisors. There's a well-known body of information. There are hundreds of books. Every training company has multiple offerings in that category. But the transition from manager to leader, boy, that's thinner air. And so 3 or 4 of the things to bullet out to consider. First is, how do you communicate vision? Secondly, I hate the title. Primal leadership is just, it sounds like primate leadership, life in the jungle with Jane Goodall. It's just, I don't like the name, but it's really about the emotional sides of leadership and how do you connect with people not wired like you. And it's absolutely essential. It's the emotional intelligence people. So primal leadership, I think, is absolutely essential along that line. Number 3, you can't skip management and jump to leadership. A lot of people want to go straight to leadership, and it trips them up every time. If you can't do the blocking and tackling of management, then you won't appreciate it. One of the things you realize, Seth, is you need the detail people to be successful. People who have not learned the blocking and tackling and managing don't understand why you have to do those things. And one of my favorite people to work with, he just is abysmal as a manager. And so when you work with him, and he's probably my favorite leader I've ever worked with, is an incredibly gifted leader. But whenever he trips himself up, it's because he thinks it ought to go a lot faster, because he doesn't see all the details that have to happen, because he skipped the management in the nonprofit that he's in. He went straight to leadership, and he's in a unique role, and he can do that. But it's just a constant battle to say, slow down, here are the pieces that have to go in place, or you're going to outrun your headlights. So if you don't get the blocking and tackling and management down, it can cripple you as a leader. And then lastly, being able to understand how to think in terms of strategy, and I agree with Jack Welch, being able to see around corners, ends up being a critical skill for leaders, And then, there's the operational stuff you have to be able to take into account. But most people can learn those things. But being able to look around corners, I know it's a related division, but thinking in terms of what strategic moves are going to help us stay ahead of competition, are going to help us, if we're nonprofit, fulfill our mission better. I think those are the key pieces that have to be filled in for a person who makes that transition.
Okay, so let me break down a couple of these topics here. Break down or give me a little more detail on seeing around corners. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, seeing around corners, what are some great examples of this? Well, for example, you've got the driverless car, driverless trucking. And so now a whole lot of players are jumping into this, and they're spending, a bunch of billions of dollars to do it. And being able to see around where that's going is critical. For example, artificial intelligence. What's that mean? For a number of years, there's been an advantage to small, nimble companies. And a lot of the companies that have worked their way to the top, Apple's now, I believe it's its 11th year of most admired company, almost $1 trillion in market valuation. And Apple was, nowhere close to the top of the list 30 years ago. And so you've got the ability of companies to upset. Well, one of the things that is now moving in the favor of large companies is, artificial intelligence, AI, the ability to mine big data in ways and get access to information that smaller organizations just don't have. That, my friend, is looking around corners. It's the ability to say, what's out there, where's the market going, and how do you get in front of it? I think, Apple's legendary for being able to make design such an important thing. And if there's any criticism of what Apple's done wrong in the last 5 years, it's put design over functionality again and again. And whether it's the Mac with its little sliding window, or whether it's the 10 or X phone or the latest whatever sucks, and then suddenly they become sell a bunch more and are worth another $200 billion. And so I'm not an Apple fanboy, but I also think Apple's proved the folks wrong because it looked around some key corners. I think it looks ahead too far, and Samsung comes along in its shadow and kind of makes its stuff a little more functional than copies it. And Samsung does quite handily with that, but Apple does a really good job looking around corners.
Yeah,
is that helpful or just long-winded?
No, it's super helpful. And if I can add one thing there, I think I could have a really good year this year. I had a really broke year last year because it was my first year, right? And what I'm looking at is, okay, so let's say I have a very good year this year. This economy cannot hold for more than another 4 years. So what kind of products, what kind of leverage can I have in a down economy? And one of my dreams is, how do I get into a couple of, 3-bedroom ranch, brick, boring homes to rent out? How do I get a duplex or a small apartment building? Because as the credit card debt continues to go up, which is probably what's going to cause the next recession, that means people aren't going to be able to buy houses. And I want to be in a good spot to be in the rental game. Right. And maybe, websites and social media management and podcasting aren't quite as sexy to businesses at that point because they've clamped down on outside spending quite a bit. So how can I, and maybe not, how can I, hopefully use some success this year to get into some other places to where if a product line or two dries up, I'm still in good shape, right? So I would say that's an example of seeing around corners, to not get super arrogant and, just
nobody, and it could be one of two things. And so let's talk strategy and vision. Okay, on that, no leader is going to do well unless they're looking at downturns. No leader is going to do well unless they're looking at downturns. Now, it's not a very exciting book. It was the #1 book, or like 2002. It's called Execution by Ron Schron and Larry Bossidy. What I thought was there's a lot of great ideas in that. It kind of put the topic of execution on the map. Execution was like a 2-day part of a project management course in an MBA. And now execution gets its own called out set of skills and disciplines. And I think that's really valuable. But it was a boring book. There were about 2 pages in it when Larry Bossidy talks through the kinds of questions that he would ask as a leader of his VPs, of his managers, especially as they were launching a new product. And it's worth it for those 2 pages with those kinds of questions, because basically what he's asking is, what are you going to do when you run into this? What are you going to do when you run into that? It's asking the kind of questions about how are you going to handle it when these things happen. Now, that's often called scenario planning. And, Shell Oil Company, Fortune magazine just reported on its latest issue. Shell Oil Company is assuming that we're not going to have $50 a barrel gasoline again, that it's the era of low money. And so they got to get used to much lower cost business. They are looking around the corners. And Shell's been famous for this scenario planning where you come up with multiple possibilities, and then you come up with plans based on how likely each one of those is going to be. And if a potential recession doesn't fit into your plans, then you're going to be in trouble when you're not asking the right questions. Now, in your case, let's switch gears. Do you need to diversify, or do you just get bored quickly? So that's really the question for you. Do you need to diversify, or are you just bored and want to look into something else?
2 things can be true at the same time.
Oh, exactly. My wife
2 things
loves
can be
me.
true at the same time.
My wife loves me, and she wonders why she married me. Both of those have often been true.
Okay, let's wrap up on this. You said if you skip the management and go straight to leadership, you're going to be in trouble. I can think of a couple scenarios where this is especially true. Number 1, 25-year-old rock star employee that is an incredible practitioner, particularly in the digital space at this point, and gets rocketed up to a VP spot. I'm thinking about the guy that I would recommend you pay attention to online, John Saddington. He was a VP at Pepsi at 25, right? How could he have any management skills to run a division at 25 years old? I also think about the family business scenario, right? I mean, because once you get to the second generation and the third generation, you wind up having a lot more problems because usually the kid comes in, they're a little more spoiled. They went to an Ivy League college because there was the money, and the parents don't want them to suffer through what they suffered through. And then they come in and they're in leadership without being in management, sometimes without being a role player. And that's where if you've ever heard the phrase, a generation to make it, a generation to maintain it, and a generation to crash and burn, right? Usually by the third generation.
We ought to do a couple episodes on just that topic, because that, I'd say about when I'm in an association doing a breakout session, about 1 out of every 5 times people show up thinking we're talking about succession planning when we're talking about generations rather than how to make generations work together. And that's a huge topic in family businesses. It's related even more than what you said that's not true. It is exactly what you said because of the perils of the prince or the princess. And you don't get management experience if you don't actually manage. And you don't manage because you're the prince or princess. And so people don't respond to you the same way they would another person. And as a result, you never learn your management chops. And as a result, you think you're more qualified than you are. Let's wrap up with this. I was working at McDonald's with some, and talking to a guy that starts new franchisees. He said, you'll often see farmers that sell their farmland and need to do something with their money. And you'll often see farmers come in and buy a franchise from McDonald's. And because they don't know a lot about running a franchise, they just do what we tell them to. He said, 2 of the guys that burn through the most money the most quickly both had MBAs from Harvard, and they spend all their time looking at case studies to show us they were smarter about how we ought to do things than we were. And they literally burned through all their money because they didn't work on the business. They just spent their time as if it was one big case study. And so that often can happen with the peril of the prince or the princess. They go off to a good school, they have a lot of ideas, and the people on their team don't actually respond to them as if they were a normal manager, and so they never get the management chops.
Okay, let's wrap up on this question, because I think this is more relevant. I mean, it could be that it is you. You were a rock star. You got promoted way too fast, and you don't know how to manage. You're probably gonna have to talk to your own company about that. I don't know if there's a super easy put a bow on it, thing that Hayden can do for you there, and I certainly can't help you with that. However, if you work with somebody who got promoted too fast, and or is the boss's niece, and or is the person who is set to inherit the business, and they don't know what they're doing, and you're inheriting their problems, and they don't know how to manage, and now they're trying to lead, what do you do with it?
Oh, well, my uncle was in Korea. And so I inherited his blade. I think you just have to fall on your sword, Seth. I think that's all you can really do when you're in that setting. You just have to fall on your sword, man.
So
no, I'm sorry. We'll talk about it in an episode. Everybody's got a kryptonite. Everybody's got a particular personality or team combination that they find very difficult to handle. And I find a prince or a princess very difficult to handle. I find somebody who got promoted too quickly and doesn't know as much as they think they know, or especially somebody who gets privileges because of who their parents are or who their uncles are. That's kryptonite for me. I would quit. Life's too short. I would have to need the job really, really, really badly to live in the middle of that. So I would just fall on my sword and quit, because for me, that's kryptonite. I just don't have any patience with that. Just like you don't have any patience with people arguing over what Christmas parties mean to you. I don't have any patience with somebody who sends us on crazy missions to do impossible and silly things because they don't know what they're doing and don't know how to ask, and or have such privilege. I know there are people. I had a guy in a session once who works, and wasn't even in the Middle Eastern country, but all the ranks of the businesses are populated by family members, and his boss would come up with these ideas, and he'd spend half of his week working on things that had absolutely no meaning to the business. And it was just part of what he did to keep his job. And if that's one of the best jobs where you live, I guess you get adjusted to it. Thank goodness we have the freedom where we are here in Chicagoland, yet a place with a lot of Cardinal fans, where people can have the freedom to choose the team they want to root for, even though the last 2 years it's been kind of the Cubs' time. As painful as it is to me to stay in the St. Louis ballpark Hilton and look down into an empty stadium during the playoffs. It hurts in ways that are just hard to imagine and explain.
Well, hey, I will say this. When you say life's too short and quit, the biggest missteps I've made in my career, number one, not firing people fast enough. Number two, not firing myself fast enough and quitting when I was miserable. I feel like it's too many episodes where people are going to think I'm like playing some kind of character. I'm like, no, you should fire that person or you should quit. But really, you got a lot of options right now. The economy is still good. And, and we do know that that managers hang on to people way too long. It's almost everybody. Like maybe, now that we got thousands of people listening to this thing, maybe 3 people fire too fast, out of 5,000. So odds are you're not that.
And if you work for one of those bosses who works off of pure emotion and adrenaline, and they're willing to fire off of feelings, you don't want to work there anyway, because they are their own kind of Looney Tune. And yeah, it's so funny. I have a colleague that was actually fired by Ray Kroc 4 times in her first year. She said 2 I deserved, and 2 he was just mad because I liked Pepsi, and so he fired me while I was driving him to the airport. He pulled off at the overpass, the O'Hare overpass, fired me, and then drove my car to the airport and parked it. And then called the office and said, "Here's where a car is parked. Somebody come and pick her up." I fired her. So Ray Kroc was famous for that, but then he was also famous for delivering delivering 14 cases of European Coca-Cola because she likes sweeter pop, and is saying, okay, you're not fired, and I'm sorry, I was a bit wound up. But so you can either work with somebody who is a bit intense and a bit emotional, but then makes up in wonderful ways, or you're working with somebody who's just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and, a bit capricious in the way they do it. Like maybe they had a show, where they fire people a lot, and they're just capricious in the way they manage, and it's hard to figure out on any given Sunday who's on their team or not.
Hey, you might have noticed that the consultant, the Millennial, is getting some more attention here. If you want to know how that's happening, I run an agency called Digital Profit Farm. And if you want to know how we've been able on social media to go from 0 to about 5,000 people an episode, and over the course of 5 episodes, I would love to give you some of my secrets about how that's happening. You can grab my free guide on how to do that, how to get your website squared away, and then also how to leverage the media for some free publicity in your local market. And that is if you're a mom and pop shop up through a small to medium sized corporation. If you're one of the really big dogs, you should probably go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on all that stuff. But on the lower end, if you don't have several $100,000, I would love to give you my free advice. You can get that at digitalprofitfarm.com. And as we wrap up, we are both pretty active in the Facebook community. You can search the Consultant and the Millennial Facebook group, and we've got some really cool stuff going there as far as helping other people on their management and leadership journey, and maybe even their transition from management to leadership. And we always go back and do some extra content, and that's the richness of the community. Really is where the gold in this podcast comes in, not necessarily just the crap we're saying for 30 minutes. Oh, I think I was thinking you were going to say goodbye or something, Hayden.
I do most of the talking, so nobody wants to hear me anymore. And especially any Cub fans here in Chicago, they're already disgusted.
Hey, we'll be back next week. I'll stop destroying hard drives, and we will stop missing weeks where there's not an episode. So we will see you then.